Okay, let's roll. This is chapter 14, social psychology. So here's what we're going to do. I should say that this version of the lecture is intended for the in-person students who had their lecture canceled. However, I'm also going to post it for the online students. It's just that any references made to, in class or anything like that, obviously, you're not going to worry about those references. But yes. So, with that disclaimer, here are our learning objectives and our plan. Um, the chapter covers all of these topics and more. I'm focusing on these things because they prepare you for um, uh, the final exam if you're in an in-person class, or for the essay, if you're not. It's all the same, really. It's just phrased a little bit differently, presented a little bit differently, but the assignment is the same. Okay, so make sure that you do the reading. There's lots and lots of stuff in the book that is really important to know that we're not necessarily going to talk about in the lecture, or it would be like 6 hours long. So, in the interest of time, here we go. Okay, so what is social psychology? Like most things, it associates these two ideas together. So it's how we understand the thoughts and feelings of behaviors as influenced by other people. Okay, so we're just trying to think about how other folks can influence our thoughts, how we act, what we do, that sort of thing. So, all right. So, first, let's talk about attraction and love. There's a lot about this in the book. What I'm going to cover isn't actually in the book, because I think that there's some more important stuff that you should know. So, your book says that in order to fall in love with somebody, you have to be in proximity to them, that you can't fall in love with them unless you interact with them. This is obvious, but it's also not obvious because, people sometimes think that they have fallen in love with like celebrities or something. And that is something else. That's infatuation, which we're not really going to cover, or obsession or all sorts of other things. But in order for you to fall in love with somebody in a genuine manner, you have to interact with them. It has to have some level of interaction. So the matching hypothesis is that people will seek to match themselves with others in a way that seeks for equality on the measures of self-worth, physical attractiveness, popularity, that sort of thing. Um, this is generally true. I think that this is something that definitely does happen, but it can be really problematic because if you think about these properties, they are kind of by definition uh, superficial, right? So this is kind of a cognitive error, right? Like, because these are not the things that make a strong relationship. So there's a wildly popular show that exists purely to address this specific error. It fails. It doesn't address this error. It's Love is Blind, right? So it's not Love is Blind, for those of you who are not initiated, is a reality-ish show that starts off with folks meeting each other in a way that they can speak to each other, but that they can't see each other. And they talk and they connect and they see what sort of spark there is for a couple of weeks, I think it is. And some people decide to get married, and some people obviously don't. And the show follows the folks who decide to get married based on, these interactions that they've had without actually seeing each other or interacting in any sort of group situation, right? Because that's part of it too. Um, the show follows them after they've decided to try and see what that might be like. And at the end they actually get married or they don't. And obviously it's a television show, it's a reality show. It's sort of drama, 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 right? But the concept is to kind of go around the matching hypothesis, right? Because you cannot see the person, um, and because there's no interaction with them in a social context, you can't gauge their popularity. You can, of course, get a sense of their self-worth, but again, without that sort of social component involved, it's harder to get a true picture of this. And so when it's just that interaction between two people without kind of the more realistic context of the rest of the world, and input from other people and competing demands, because of course while they're doing the show, these folks are not working, right? The show is just they're doing the show, and then when they decide to pair off and they go home, then they start working again, and slowly, or well, maybe not that slowly, um, the components of life are sort of introduced back in, and that's when we start to see some problems, right? And so, at the very top, you have the situation where they have learned what each other looks like kind of all at once. And it's interesting because um a lot of the time, they're very happy with what they see, and they have an instant physical attraction to match their emotional attraction that has caused them to choose this person. But every so often, um they will see each other, and it doesn't it doesn't go that well. Interestingly, I don't think I've ever seen one where when they meet each other, they immediately say like, "Oh, no, not for me." Usually what happens is like they'll kind of go through the motions, and then right afterwards they'll just be like, "Oh, this wasn't what I had in my mind," and then just sort of bail. And so it's interesting that the show attempts to do this, that it attempts to go around the matching hypothesis, but that it is not successful in doing that, right? Because it's not like you are married already by the time you kind of lift the veil, so to speak. So Love is Blind is not the first to use this kind of concept as fodder, right? So like I have a little graphic here from Beauty and the Beast, same kind of idea, right? Like that matching can be made on other criteria, right? So it is a really good idea to try to put aside sorting criteria that is matched on these sort of superficial qualities of physical attractiveness and all of that stuff, because in the end those things don't really contribute to a lasting connection. So, it's an interesting hypothesis. It's interesting to follow how it works, and how it changes as we move across the life course. Okay. So, one of the things that I thought was really important to discuss is romantic love. So your book follows this concept in a way that I don't love, pun not intended, but your book says that passionate love is a hormone stage, and then after that comes companionate love, as though hormones no longer exist, you know. It's not a useful way to frame love in the sense that there's way more to it than this. And it kind of implies that, there's this period of time that you get where you're like obsessed with the person that you're going to be with, and then, it kind of crashes and you're just kind of stuck with whatever is is left. And it's not really that's not really the situation. So, there is another frame for romantic love in the course of romantic love that Dr. Susan Campbell came up with. You can Google her for more information. But this five stage process of romantic love, there's something in particular that I like about it. But let me first take you through it. So. In the dating phase, this is like the initial stage when you're meeting somebody. You don't really, this is like from, hey, this is Jane, hey, this is John sort of situation, right? And, this dating phase is the very, very beginning, and you don't really know each other. It's all built on, that initial attraction, that draws you together and makes you want to get to know each other better. So that phase creates kind of some glue to stick you together for a little bit, just to explore the situation a little bit. And then the honeymoon stage comes when, you're not you're not meeting at the restaurant and then going home anymore, right? Like this is when you've kind of established a romantic connection, and you have kind of the beginnings of a relationship. And I think we would all recognize this stage of a relationship either because we have lived it or because we see it in the media a lot. This is the stage where, you kind of think that they're amazing. You don't really see that they have any flaws. You're very passionate about them, both sexually and just kind of emotionally. And the feeling is very euphoric. It's very like, dopamine induced kind of high to it. And a lot of people say when they use the phrase like addicted to love, what they're talking about is they're addicted to this stage, right? This stage of feeling kind of euphoric about another person, because it really is a huge dopamine rush, and it is a drug, right? Like we've already learned that that's what drugs do, is they create, among other things, dopamine rushes, right? So that feeling of euphoria is very real, and it can absolutely become addictive, right? Anything that causes a dopamine rush can become addictive for sure. So you know that phase can go on for lots of lengths of time, but usually it's kind of dusted by about a year, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but kind of vaguely a year, maybe two at the outset, right? And a lot of times people make lasting commitments in the honeymoon stage. They, especially young people who have not had this experience before or not had it very often, will make lasting commitments in this stage. And so they'll get engaged, they'll get married, they'll have children, all in the honeymoon stage where they're still kind of, as your book would say, ruled by hormones. And you're feeling very idealistic about your partner. And so it's easy to get swept up in that stage of a relationship, but I think what your book was trying to get across here about, passionate love and companionate love is that it does pass, and it does. There is of course, hormonal component to this, but also kind of more importantly, you are getting to know this person much better, right? So we can only be on our best behavior for so long, right? You cannot fake it for very long. You cannot do all the dishes that are sitting in the sink if that's just not your way of going through the world for so long before you're just like, well, I guess it's fine, and once you once you begin to show more of who you genuinely are, and are not kind of like the model of patience or the model of sexuality or the model of anything really anymore. You're just kind of yourself. You're kind of sliding into who you actually truly are. Not the best version of yourself, but just like the actual version of yourself. Then what ends up happening is that you enter the power struggle phase. And in the power struggle phase, because you are kind of showing who you actually are, this is where the conflicts begin to come. This is where the disagreements begin to arise because we do have, real and meaningful differences from the people that we're paired with. This is regardless of how well matched we are, how much we love them, how much we, enjoy their company or have things in common or whatever, we are always going to have conflicts and disagreements. And the power struggle phase is that in which you have to learn how to navigate those. You have to learn how to solve issues together. And this, I think, is where a lot of relationships break down. Because, oops, folks, um, folks don't really understand that this is a natural point in a relationship and that it's not necessarily an indication that the relationship needs to come to an end. I think that we have been socialized to believe that once we are kind of knocking heads with the person that we're with, that you're not compatible and it's time to throw in the towel. And that's not necessarily the case. It might be the case, right? It very well could be that, you have learned things about yourself and you learn things about them, and that suggests that this is not the relationship for you. However, it could also just be that what is at stake is that you need to learn kind of more about each other's genuine self, and that you are learning how to navigate that by having um, problem solving conversations that are genuine, right? That you're not just, capitulating so that you're not causing issues, or you're not fighting just to be right or whatever, right? So this stage can go on for a long time, right? So if your problem solving skills are not very good, or if you have made a lasting commitment, like having children or getting married or something like that, and you don't really have the skills in place, but you're stuck in the relationship, the power struggle phase can go on for decades. I mean, there are relationships that never leave the power struggle phase. This is always going on, and you never reach stability and commitment, which is that level of understanding where you've worked through kind of the major challenges. You have an understanding of each other. There's nothing there that is I don't know, a deal breaker, right? So you've kind of looked at everything and decided, okay, this is a situation that I'm willing to live in. This person is not perfect. I am not perfect, but we have decided that we can live happily in the situation that we are in. So, again, not everybody makes it to this stage, right? And after the stability and commitment stage is the bliss stage. And this is sort of a deepening of the stability and commitment phase. The bliss stage is really one where you have not just kind of reached a point where you're like, well, this is what it is, and I love you, and I guess we're just in it. And you've made it to, I genuinely appreciate who this person is for themselves. And, this is not only can I live with who they are, but I really enjoy who they are, right? And again, not all relationships make it there, right? And it, it it's not common, right? It's not common to see relationships that have reached this sort of level of, peace and flow, right? But it certainly occurs. But when it does occur, it takes years to get there. Even the fastest maturing relationships, it will take years to get to that stage. And, this is not necessarily a unidirectional process either, right? So when our relationships change, for example, with the introduction of a child, or when you bring a parent home to live with you to caretake for them, when there's major shifts, you can go backwards, right? You can go backwards to power struggle and have to kind of work through that stuff again, because there's new things that have been introduced. So, it's romantic love has a process to it. And I think that for me, the thing that felt really important to impart to you is that you should not assume that when you get to the power struggle phase that there's something wrong. It's fine and expected and inevitable even that you are going to get to a part of your relationship that is less about, sex and bliss and more about figuring out how to navigate the realities of your relationship, and that's normal. And you should welcome that opportunity to do. The thing that needs to happen here, though, is that if you do not both have good, strong communication skills, this is the time to go find them, right? So we talked last week in the therapy lecture about some types of therapy that you can do. So the marriage and family therapy that you can do, the couples therapy that you can do, and the John Gottman books, right? There are other researchers and therapists and stuff who have books out there, but I like John Gottman because he is a legitimate researcher with good methodology, and he takes his legitimate research and writes books for the common person, in an understandable way that is accessible for everybody, whether or not they have, taken a college class. So I really encourage folks to, if they're finding themselves in the power struggle phase and they don't quite know where to go with it, that they engage in some sort of therapeutic process, or at the very least, they buy, the Seven Principles of Making Marriage Work or some other John Gottman book, that suits the issue that you're living with right now. So, that's romantic love. Okay. And now we're going to talk about something different. I want you to understand that obviously, we're not going to watch this video together because we're recording, but your notes from here on out in the lecture are going to be really important for your essay, for chapter 14. So make sure that you're taking good notes on the concepts. And the benefit, of course, to recording the lecture is that you can pause it and take whatever time that you need to take the notes that you need. And you are gonna have to watch the um the the video more than one time, but I will talk to you a little bit about how I would approach doing that as we get there. So let's talk about bystander intervention first. There's a lot of information about helping behavior in your book, but again, and this is that information in your book is going to be really useful for you, for your essay. Like, make sure that you've done a good job of reading the chapter in your book. Again, this lecture really goes beyond what's in your book, to kind of deepen your understanding, but it is not intended to replace your reading. Okay, so bystander intervention. So if you need help, right? There are certain steps that you need to go through to get them and to get help. And if you have ever gone to a CPR class, you're going to recognize these steps immediately, okay? Because this is what they teach you in a CPR class to help you make sure that you get the help that you need to save the life of the person that you're working on, right? So first, you have to understand that um, people are not going to help unless you have set the stage for them to help. Unless they are trained in their own way as first responders or whatever, right? To step in when there's some sort of crisis happening. For the most part, people freeze in an emergency. Sometimes they actively run the other way, right? But for the most part, people just freeze and they watch, right? So you have to understand that if you want people to help you, you have to do certain things. So, um, you need to say with words, I need help. Okay. So you would think that you wouldn't have to do this, but you would think like, I was screaming, I was obviously in pain, I was this, I was that. But people can do all sorts of mental gymnastics to talk them out of the idea that like the person that they heard screaming needed their help. Well, they were standing with somebody else, so I thought it was fine, or I couldn't find them, or all sorts of things that you can come up with, right? I thought they were kidding, whatever. You have to tell people that you need help if you need help, okay? So, um, you should identify specific helpers, okay? So you in the blue, help me, right? Like you have to identify a specific person to do this, to give you a hand, right? Because if you have like a crowd of onlookers and you're like, I need help, for the most part, they're just gonna stare at each other and nobody's gonna know like who's gonna take the initiative, right? So you gotta name somebody, make eye contact, point at them, call their name, whatever it is, right? But you have to identify a specific person to help you and then give instructions, right? So in the case of CPR, right, like the instructions are going to be, get the IED, call 911, whatever it is. But you have to tell them what to do for the most part. You can also ask like, I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? But don't get bogged down in that step, right? Like the right answer almost always starts with call 911, almost always. And if you do not know what to do, that is always a good thing to start with. So if you are on the other side of that and you're the bystander, right? And let's say that like, the person who needs help doesn't know these steps. They're just like a person and they don't know what they're supposed to do to get help. But you're watching a situation unfold, okay? So you got to think to yourself like, "Oh, did I notice something unusual that was happening? Did you notice that something is really wrong about that unusual thing that is happening? And do you think that help is needed?" So this is the first place that people have a tendency to get a little stuck because again, you can talk yourself out of that pretty easily. Like if you think about somebody who is, pulled over on the shoulder, right? This is something we see all the time, right? We see people pulled over on the shoulder all the time. Nobody stops every time. Right? But think about the times that you stop, or think about the times that you would even want to stop. What is going on that made you stop? So, for example, I can tell you one where a lot of people stop is when they witness what happened, right? So if you witness an accident, right, and you are right behind the accident, usually you're going to pull over. Not everybody will, right? Because they will get stuck at step three where they think that they have a responsibility or they don't have a responsibility, right? Or at step four where they're like, oh, I just can't help, so I'm just going to keep driving. By the way, if you witness a car accident, you should absolutely should stop because at the very least, you should provide your contact information so that the police or the insurance company or whatever can get in touch with you. Because there's, your eyewitness knowledge is needed. But anyway, um, you you often decide not to pull over if you don't see that something happened. But if you see that something did happen, a lot of times people will pull over. Um, and often if you see other people pulling over, you will pull over. Or if it's really, really obvious that something has gone wrong. I was in an accident a few years ago and I got hit by a motorcycle. I was in a car. The motorcycle hit me. And obviously I pulled over, right? But so did like probably five or six other people because the guy was on the ground, right? Like his bike was on the ground, he was on the ground, like I had pulled over, like it was really obvious that something was wrong and that help was needed. So a bunch of people pulled over. And like again though, we kind of ended up in a you need help kind of column situation where, I was like, hey, we need to call 911, that sort of thing. And but sometimes, even if you don't know the appropriate form of help to render, you should step in anyway. Like ask, what do you want me to do? Right? Don't just stand there and stare with your jaw hanging open. And don't keep driving, right? If you see something going on that looks like it's a real problem, like first assess for safety, of course, and make your judgment about safety. Like don't just, pull over while going 80 miles in the left lane, right? But assess for safety and then think to yourself, like, as a decent human being, do I have responsibility to help? The answer is almost always yes, right? If it is safe for you to intervene, you probably do have a responsibility to help. Yeah. Okay. Attitudes, persuasion, and cognitive dissonance. So, with regard to attitudes, the there are ways to influence attitudes that are not direct. So the most obvious, the easiest one is the mere exposure effect, right? So our attitude becomes more positive around things that, we perceive as positive just by exposure. This is kind of how, kids who are raised in horse families become horse kids. Kids who are raised in car families become car kids. Like, it's not conscious, it's not rational, it's just like, that's what you're around, so that's what you're into. Now, obviously, this is not something that is foolproof, right? There are plenty, if it was, we would all just be, whatever our parents are. Whatever our parents are into, that's what we're going to be into. And that's just not how it works, right? So it's more complicated than this, but exposure really is kind of about the environment around you. And, you kind of become interested in the things that you see happening. Conditioning is just exactly what it is that you've already learned from the learning chapter, is that if something is reinforced enough, you will start to feel more positive toward it, right? So if something that you do is reinforced, you will feel good when you do it because it produces a reinforcement, right? So, and you feel by definition good about the thing that is used to reinforce you. So you're gonna start to feel good about the thing itself that you've done, right? So we can pair something neutral, like, for example, race, right, with an emotional stimulus like empathy or hate. And those associations are strengthened by the conditioning, right? So, if you have that pairing of, for example, hate around race, and that's paired and it's reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, it's going to feel good to you, right? Because that's the behavior that is being reinforced, right? Okay. So cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that we feel when our actions don't reflect our beliefs. So the bottom line about this is that we do things all the time that don't reflect our beliefs and attitudes. And we do all sorts of mental gymnastics to create a space where that's okay, right? So we'll talk about that with some examples as we go. But the bottom line is that usually we change our beliefs to match our actions. We don't usually change our actions to match our beliefs, right? Because there's a reason why it's hard. And the other alternatives are that we just refuse to think about it too deeply. We go along a peripheral processing route, which we'll talk about in a short minute, or we find a way to justify what our actions are. There's that process of justification, man, that's a really tricky one. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you go back and look at the um the mechanisms that Freud suggested that we use to kind of turn ourselves in mental circles, to allow ourselves to think in ways that we don't necessarily agree with in other circumstances. So when you go back and you look at what those are, right, there's a defense mechanism for this. It's called rationalization. So, it's really important to understand that, you know, rationalizing our behavior is not a cognitively rigorous process, right? We're not thinking through each step with critical thinking. We are doing anything that we can to bring our beliefs into alignment with our actions. In a situation where, if it was somebody else that we were talking about, we would never agree to what the behavior was. So here's some examples. I didn't vote because I was busy. One vote doesn't change elections anyway, right? So that's a rationalization. Amazon is terrible, but it's cheap and I don't make much money. They're working on improving things, and that's a process I want to support. All right. Also a rationalization. Um, I, if you find yourself in one of these rationalizations, or you can imagine all sorts of other ones, I am sure. The Amazon one is particularly tricky, because this is one that most people are dealing with, right? And you can also like plug in here Walmart, or whatever giant conglomerate company you want to plug in. The Netflix special in the corner here, the buy now the shopping conspiracy one, it's not only about Amazon, but it is largely about Amazon. And it's pretty sobering, for those of us who are living this particular form of cognitive dissonance, which, by the way, I also am, right? Um, I'm not going as far as to being like, well, they're working on ways to improve things. I'm very uncomfortable with Amazon business practices, but I still shop there, right? So like how do I deal with that? Well, I'm not justifying it. I'm not rationalizing it. It's a refusal to examine, right? Because if I was willing to do that, I wouldn't do it. So you see the problem. So anyway, I recognize that that it's there, but I really recommend for other folks who are kind of wrestling with that type of thing, I really recommend that you go and watch that Netflix special. It's very uncomfortable. You should definitely do that. Okay. So cognitive persuasion routes, we have a few slides on this. And cognitive persuasion routes are, ooh, they're so tricky. So, persuasion is the process of consciously attempting to change attitudes, okay? And we do this all the time. And it's not, it generalizes to like making choices, right? Like how do we make choices about how we move through the world? And central root processing is what we use to make choices, to change attitudes, whatever it is, when we're able to think clearly and calmly and analyze the information. Peripheral root processing is when we're not really able to do it, or we're not capable of doing it, or we don't want to do it, or we don't have time to do it, and all sorts of things, right? So we attend to whatever peripheral cue is accessible to us in whatever state that we're in, right? If you're really upset and you have to make a decision, you are only going to have so much ability to attend to whatever cue. And depending on what level of disrupted you are, that could be very basic level stuff. So this is a chart of a car options, and it's, as you can see, it's very detailed, right? So it has the prices, it has I mean, it has all sorts of stuff in it that I don't even know what this is, and I know a few things about cars. So it has a lot of data in it, and I think that you can see that in order to really process this, you need to be able to think about it kind of from a clear-eyed place, be able to analyze the information in this raw form. But you might not have that ability. And so we'll come back to that in a bit. So this is another option. So Consumer Reports is a well-respected publication, right? Like Consumer Reports is not junk. Like they do good work in looking at products, not just cars, but that's the example we're working on right now. And even though it's well researched on their side, it's not well researched on your side, right? So if you pick it up and you're like, okay, I trust Consumer Reports, and you flip it open to like the best car page and you pick the thing at the top of the list, that is a peripheral route choice that you have made. Even though it is still a good choice, it's a peripheral route choice because you have not shown that you're willing to analyze, right? And you have attended to the cue that is accessible to you. And, you've made a conscious decision not to put a bunch of resources into central root processing, right? Because it requires this, but it's still a choice that you have made. So when is one route better than another? It is very tempting to say that it's always better to engage in central root processing, but it's not. It's not always better to engage in central root processing because, you know, when we have decisions to make that are important, that they're long term, that they're expensive, that they're risky, whatever, and they're complex, and we don't have a lot of trustworthy support, then, you kind of have to do it yourself, right? You have to go through that process of engaging your critical thinking skills and putting your time and effort into doing the research and finding the answers to whatever the problem is that is in front of you. And it always takes time to do a central root processing, journey. It always takes time. And it also requires that you have certain skills in place, right? Our very first assignment in this class was around critical thinking. And the reason why that is so is because critical thinking is absolutely essential to being able to do central root processing in an effective way that leads you to an answer that meets your needs. And so, you know, we we do this when you know when we shop for cars sometimes, right? So I just gave you an example where we could take car shopping one way or the other. But if you are somebody who is, shopping for a car not as, a commuter from point A to point B, but like, let's say you are a race car driver or something, well, that's kind of a dumb example, but you get the idea. You're searching for something really specialized. Here's a good one. So, I have a nephew who is physically disabled, and there are certain things that they need in the vehicle that they use to transport him from, anywhere to anywhere else. So they needed to narrow down their choices for what they used to get him around to decide what to buy. And the it involved a spreadsheet for sure. It didn't involve the spreadsheet that on par with the one that is a few slides back, but there was certainly a spreadsheet involved, and it was a long-term, very expensive decision that they had to make that had kind of special circumstances around it. So it wasn't something that you could just easily Google. And so they really needed to think creatively and really critically about what it was that they needed, what the questions were, and how to answer them. It was a really complicated decision. Now, um, on the other side of it, peripheral root processing is not always a bad choice, right? Like we make a million choices a day, and we do not always think critically about every last part of the decision that we make, right? And we'll do we'll do very peripheral processing when we're deciding what to, have for dinner, what we, are ordering at the restaurant. Like these are not things that require us to like make a spreadsheet. You know what I'm saying? Um, and then sometimes, even when the decision is important or long term or costly or high risk, if there is somebody around who you trust and they're an expert and their source of support and guidance is available to you, then you actually can kind of just lean on that person's previous processing, right? To make good decisions. So we do this all the time with doctors, right? So, if you have a doctor that you trust and you're talking through a problem and, they're like, well, I recommend that you take this medication, most people will just be like, okay, thank you, right? And they'll do it, even though medications can be life-changing, right? instead of, going out and getting a medical degree and then coming back and being like, okay, it's been 12 years, but I finally made a decision, right? So, when there is an expert available to you, you can kind of skip a lot of the central root stuff. The problem is that you really need to be able to already have critical thinking skills in place in order to be able to, decide who to trust. Right? So if you don't know how to think critically and evaluate who is trustworthy and who is not trustworthy, whose opinions you value and why that is, then you're not going to have the skills to really make good decisions about who to trust. And so either way, you need to have those critical thinking skills in place um, to support your central root processing, at least to make decisions about who to trust, right? Even if you're delegating some of your decisions to that person or to that, you know, uh, um, agency or other source of guidance. For example, the CDC comes to mind, right? Like a lot of us. Uh, Sort of just blindly follow what the CDC says to do, which, for many decades has been a perfectly valid, though peripheral route way of going through the world. But, it isn't necessarily that way anymore because the CDC has changed a lot. But again, that's a critical thinking process is, I trusted the CDC because it was staffed by, experts in the field and the decisions that they were making and recommendations that they were making were based in, scientific evidence and all of that stuff. And also, I have now decided to withdraw that kind of trusted expert badge from the CDC because a lot of those people have been replaced by, political appointees or whatever. And that is not a process that I trust with my health. So either way, you have to use your critical thinking skills, your central root processing skills to make a decision, right? So one last note on the cognitive persuasion roots. So the phrase, well, I did my own research often, makes me a little twitchy because knowing how to do a Google search and a PubMed search does not expertise make. It just doesn't, right? Because forcing really complex questions into a very simplistic kind of Googleable phrase moves us really far from central root processing when we think that's what we're doing, right? So we think that we are, carefully researching and all of that stuff, and then when we click on something, we can make decisions about what we're evaluating and all of those things. But a lot of times, the phrase "I did my own research" refers to things that you can't get a full picture of it by putting something into the Google box, even if you spend, 6 or 8 or 10 hours doing that, you might feel as though you have done central root, critical thinking processes. But if we're talking about something that people spend their entire careers working on, you definitely aren't, right? So, if you're like, I did my own research on vaccine safety, well, there are many people in the world who have spent their entire careers becoming educated about medicine and vaccine safety and all of that stuff. They've gone to get bachelor's degrees and then graduate degrees and then medical doctors and then spent years and years and years doing research. And like you can, yeah, you can spend 8 hours, at your keyboard reading, but the problem is that you are not engaging in a rigorous academic process, right? So part of why we go to college, we go to graduate school, we go to medical school, whatever it is that we're doing, instead of just sitting at home and watching YouTube videos and watch and reading books, is because that process of engaging with academia allows us to learn critical thinking skills, but also to think through ideas with other people who have a huge, heavy base of knowledge and to put together a consensus, right? They call it a scientific consensus when we're talking about the example that we're talking about, and also lots of other things, right? A scientific consensus has value. Just because there are people out there who also have training that don't agree does not mean that there isn't a scientific consensus. It means that there are outliers, right? And if 98% of, professionals in the field say, vaccines are safe, and 2% of them are like, well, I also went to medical school and I've also been researching this for, 40 years, and I don't agree with that. Well, 98% of people versus 2% of people, like what's going on there a little bit, right? So we need to understand that sometimes there's questions that lie beyond our own expertise. And sometimes, just because there are people who disagree with the general consensus doesn't mean that the consensus is invalid, and it does not mean that the people who disagree, their their disagreement holds the same weight, right? So, that's something we call a false equivalency, where, we give the same weight, the same airtime to the 2% minority view that we do the 98% majority view because, equality, equality. But not all concepts deserve equal weight, right? They don't always have equal weight in fact. They don't always have equal weight in research, right? So if they don't have equal weight or equal weight in morality, right? And so if they don't hold equal weight, they probably don't deserve equal time. And when you do the, well, I did my own research thing, some of that is easily lost because a lot of times small dissenting views are highlighted for cultural reasons and not for factual ones, right? They're highlighted for reasons of politics or because we're in a moment where everything feels very like us versus them. And that that obscures the idea that not everything deserves equal weight. And so we need to just be aware that this whole cognitive persuasion root thing exists and that we need to embrace the solution of adopting something called evidence literacy, right? Is that we understand how to integrate the expert guidance, that we understand how to evaluate source quality, not necessarily that we have to understand the evidence that they're basing their opinion on, because a lot of times that requires that you spend 20 years in school and have 30 years in the field. We're not going to do that, but we have to be able to evaluate, like, why is this expert somebody that I trust, right? And that is going to employ your critical thinking skills. right? And so we have to understand how to do this process so that we can employ this solution of evidence literacy. Okay. So stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination. All right. I'm gonna kind of go through the terms a little bit quickly. But like you can pause and go back. And also this is written in your book in quite some detail. So in-groups and out-groups, in-groups are the group that we're in, right? We put a lot of cognitive effort into thinking about these folks, and we can distinguish easily between the nuances of the people in our in-group. But the folks in the out-group, we can't do that. They're sort of like this amorphous blob. And we're not very good at being able to distinguish fine differences between them. And when we can't do that, it kind of leads us to a place where we're vulnerable to prejudice and discrimination because we're not really able to understand kind of nuances. So there's some vocabulary of bias that it's worth understanding first. Social categorization is that first step that we take when we meet somebody. It's really just the basics of like what they're presenting as, and it's not necessarily bad, right? It's just facts. Stereotypes, though, are biases that we have that apply to an entire social group, and they're not necessarily negative either, right? So all people with English accents are smart, right? Like that's not negative, but it's also not true. It's a bias. So, a negative stereotype, though, is a prejudice. It's a belief about a group that suggests that they deserve lower social status, right? So, the example that I have put here is undocumented immigrants don't deserve the same rights as citizens. This is a really common one right now, right? And so that negative stereotype is going to lead us to a behavior, right? And the behavior is discrimination. That's the action that we take, right? So I'm going to deny this undocumented family food resources because, Americans should be prioritized. And so you can see how the belief and the behavior are linked. So all of these can be explicit, so they can be thoughts that you're having and even statements that you're making out loud or, in words in your own head, or implicit. You don't necessarily have to think about them at all. They're just there, taking up space rent-free in your head. So, prejudiced responses. So, this example comes from your book. It's not a great example, but it kind of gets us where we need to go. So, the green path here leads to a reduction in negatively biased, which prejudiced, right? So, responses. The prejudice is still there, right? It's not that the prejudice is going away, it's that the impact of the prejudice is reduced, right? So there's nothing here that leads to um, you know, immediate dispelling of the prejudice. That takes time, right? You have to when you think through the process of what you're doing, how you're reacting to people, then you have an opportunity to change your responses, to change your biases, like to reduce your prejudiced responses. You have that opportunity to do that. But in the red path, you're in a situation where not thinking about those things, not slowing yourself down to examine the way that you're thinking about stuff, leads you to a continuation of your prejudiced thought process, and that leads you to a continuation of the unconscious and the conscious discriminatory behavior, right? You can see how that occurs. So what do we do? Right? So we all have biases, right? We all have prejudices. It doesn't matter what our conscious values are towards equality and equity, and like we all have these. And for those of you who did the assignment about biases and mental health, if you did the IAT and you were like, this doesn't reflect my belief about myself because, I don't treat anybody differently, and I kind of called you out on that. It's because we all have biases. That is just part of being a human being. And we all have prejudices. It doesn't matter what our conscious values are in the sense that those things still exist. How our conscious values come into play is in our behavior, right? So we can get stuck in not intervening to change our behavior because we think that, um, if we acknowledge that these things exist in us, that we just feel so guilty that we can't even like really function. And that's not useful. So we have to understand that there is a way to behave in a way that um, kind of mitigates the biases and prejudices that you hold. And that's by following the sort of green arrow path, right? And slowing yourself down and saying like, oh, those actually do exist. I have to be really careful to notice them, and I have to be really careful to like not act in the way that my instincts are telling me to act. So, I mean, that's a very important process. And it's necessary to reduce your biases, to reduce your prejudice responses. Okay. So, social influence. So, changing the attitudes or behaviors of other people through social power, there's three main behavioral consequences. Conformity, compliance, obedience, right? So conformity is engaging in activities because other people are doing them. Compliance is agreeing to the request of somebody, and obedience is complying to an order of somebody in power. So Stanley Milgram, you remember Stanley Milgram from week one, his experiment of where folks had to shock, and I put that in finger quotes, the other people when they gave wrong answers to kind of math questions or something. Um, you know, the question was, which of these concepts was he testing? Was he testing conformity? Was he testing compliance? Was he testing obedience, right? And he was actually testing all of these, right? Because if you look at the items along the y-axis, you can see that one of these is about conformity, right? So the bottom two bars about Confederates, right? Those are the people that are around them, right? If they're in a room filled with people who are being obedient, then they're also much more likely to be obedient. But if they're in a room where people are not being obedient, then they're much less likely. I mean, the gap between this is like 60%. It's huge. And so it includes conformity, but it also includes compliance, right? Because if you think about compliance, that's like you're agreeing to something that somebody is suggesting to you. So like that's the ordinary person bar, the fourth of the way down here. And the the obedience one is measured in a lot of different ways, but by experimenter giving orders, right? Are they giving orders by phone? Doesn't really matter. Like, like their authority is what matters. And so, the baseline for men and women is about the same. That doesn't matter at all. The phone thing does matter, but the bottom line is it's a question of obedience, right? The baseline is over 60%. is like if you're in a situation where somebody in power is telling you to do something, more often than not, you're just going to do it because they're in power regardless, right? So the factors that matter the most to whether subjects shock the other people are the ones that we already went through, is the issue about conformity, right? The participant with the fully obedient Confederates or the participant with the openly rebellious Confederates, that those are by far the biggest factors, right? But then it's followed by the ordinary person giving orders and giving orders by phone. So there's something there about compliance, right? Compliance does not have as nearly a powerful effect. So somebody has to be in charge, and there's something about them being there physically. There's something about them being in front of you that has a big effect that takes you from about 20% to about 65-ish%. It's big. So, your chapter 14 essay, right? Most of the terms that you need for the essay are already covered in the lecture that we just did. They're defined and discussed in the book, and they're also, a lot of them, defined and discussed in the video itself, right? You will not need to go outside of these three sources to get what you need for your essay. Okay. So some of the concepts are discussed in the video, but not explicitly named. So you're going to have to kind of, in your watches of the video, and there's going to be at least two of them, you're going to want to watch for those things. And so obviously we're not together to watch it together, but my advice to you is that you take notes during the video as a list of terms. This is for your first pass through the video. That you make a list of terms, and as you see them referenced, keep the progress bar up so that you can see the times. Write down the timestamps. Don't stop the video. This is not your pass to like take a bunch of notes, watch it again later, but write down where the terms pop up, and then you can kind of see where your gaps are, and that will help you prepare for your next watch through. And that's when you're going to like do the pausing and writing stuff down, and then you can kind of organize from there. I have more tips for you in the kind of assignment exam page itself. And if you are kind of stuck, I'm happy to answer whatever questions that you might have. So just like reach out. I'm here to help you with anything that you need. All right, good luck. All right.